What's going on, everyone? Taylor, Kyles, and Mike Kadlick here with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. Today, we have a lovely guest for this Monday Mailbag episode. One of the faces you see on the actual Mount Rushmore of CLNS Media, true story, Evan Lazar of Patriots.com. Evan, welcome back to the show, buddy. How we doing?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Doing well,
great.
man.
We're good.
We haven't talked in a minute either.
I know it's been a while. It's we're past the mini camp. Everyone's gone home. We're on we were talking maybe summer break type thing right now, but what a time to get three, like I tweeted earlier, 3 iterations of the CLNS Media Patriots beat crew back together on one show. So let's do it. I'm excited. This is fun.
It's like that episode of Power Rangers where all the Red Rangers came together to whoop some butt. I feel like that's the kind of vibe we're putting out here. Also,
I don't get that.
I'm sorry, that's for
me either. Don't worry, I just let them go sometimes.
That's okay. If you know what I'm talking about in the comments, please let me know. Also, YouTube said there might be some issues, so if you guys are having trouble accessing us on YouTube, please let us know.
It looks like we're good. It looks like we're rolling on YouTube. So we're
all right, we're good. So without further ado, fellas, let's get into it with some very current news with this one. With Brandon Aiyuk being on the outs apparently from his TikTok vlog, what are the chances he can be dealt? And what's the most you would give up considering he's due a massive contract? For those who aren't in the loop, a video was recently dropped where I guess Brandon Aiyuk's wife was filming him while he was FaceTiming Jaden Daniels. And he basically said to Jaden Daniels that the 49ers didn't want him. As we know, there's been a whole thing where he wants a big contract, deserves, I think, a contract that's as big, if not bigger than all the ones that we've seen handed out this offseason. But Evan, we'll start with you. What are the chances that you think he actually gets moved? And how do you like it from a Patriots perspective, given he is about to break the bank?
Chances to get moved, I would put that at relatively high in the next year. I don't know exactly when that deadline is going to come for the 49ers. Maybe it's not until next offseason. He has that 5th-year option right on his contract, so that they still have one more year of team control on him, which if you thought that he was going to get moved this offseason, you would have thought it would have been before the draft. I would have to think, just to get the pick this year versus kicking it down the road to next year. This one, I think we're all going to be in sync on this. It's obvious that the Patriots should be interested and really should just do whatever they need to do to get something like this done with a player of that caliber. But the bigger question that I have from a New England perspective is knowing that next year's first-round pick is probably going to be pretty high. Are you willing to give up a potential top 10 pick in next year's draft for Brandon Aiyuk? And I can understand if you're saying yes, I can hear that argument. But from a team building perspective, usually executives are not in the business of giving up cost controlled assets like a top 10 pick to then go hand $100 million to a veteran player. So we'll see what happens with Brandon Aiyuk. But I would say that it's more likely that he gets moved next offseason at this point than anytime soon.
Mike, what are you thinking?
I'm with you as far as that he's going to get moved. I think there's been way too much smoke around him lately over the last probably 6 months, dating back to like towards the end of the season, talking about him and T. Higgins as guys who could end up, being moved and that sort of next wave of like wide receivers that need contracts. And T. Higgins, there's been some smoke, but he signed his what do you call it, franchise tag this week. So like he's at least stuck for now. But man, Aiyuk stuff won't really stop. And I know John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, every time they get a chance, say that they're going to make it work, but it still hasn't worked. That thing comes out today again. I don't know how much to make of that video. It's probably kind of, stupid on Aiyuk's wife's part to, tweet something out like that, but hey, to each their own. So, as far as a Patriots perspective, I'm with you too. I mean, it's obvious that they need, a true number one wide receiver, and I think Aiyuk brings that. I don't think I would give up next year's first. I think it's too rich, just like you said, Evan. And this isn't a team that's, frankly, I don't think really looking to win in 2024. They don't really care about that. This is a team that's building for 2025. So, and again, I'm not sitting here saying they're going to tank or anything, but the record's probably not going to be great because they have next year in mind. They're going to, toy with things. They may throw Drake Maye in there, even maybe before he's ready, and the team won't be great. So like wins aren't gonna come too often, I don't think, this year. So that's going to be a good pick. Now, a second round pick next year, it could be in the range of 36 to 45, call it, somewhere even earlier than that. I'm okay with something like that. But yeah, I don't think the first rounder is too rich for me, I think, for Aiyuk.
Yeah, for me, Brandon Aiyuk was one of the only names that was kind of floated in trade talks where I'm like, yeah, go get that guy.
Mm-hmm.
T. Higgins is a similarly talented player, but he's got some injury issues you kind of have to take into consideration. Aiyuk's been healthy, and I think you could argue, I think it's hard to argue that he isn't a top 10 receiver in the NFL. But like you guys said, I don't know if I want to give up a first-round pick for him. You could obviously make the argument that, draft picks are just lottery tickets, and you don't know if you are going to get a top 10 player with that kind of capital, especially considering this team's probably going to be in the market for either a tackle or a wide receiver early in next year's draft. But at the same time, like you said, Evan, that's a lot of money to give out and also give up an immense amount of capital where you could potentially control someone for 5 entire seasons. So I'm on the same page. I love Brandon Aiyuk. If they can find a way to do it for less than a first, I'm all for it. He's a fantastic player. But at the same time, I just think it's way too rich considering you are likely going to have some high capital to get somebody who should be in a similar caliber if you're this draft and develop team like you say you're going to be. And then there was also a question about T. Higgins, of course, and whether the Patriots should trade for him. Now, it seemed like the team announced they agreed to a 1-year deal. So I'm not sure if it's actually the franchise tag that he's playing on. Details are still going to come out. But, just floating that around, would you guys consider maybe something with T. Higgins?
Well, I believe it is the franchise tag. They just are calling it a 1-year deal for whatever reason. But now officially he can now be traded because he can't be traded before he signs the tag. He's got to be under contract. So officially he can now be traded. But the biggest thing to me, and I'm curious to get your perspectives on this, guys. I'm not as in love with T. Higgins for the Patriots as some of the other options. Now, with that being said, you got to take the talent where the talent is there. But from a skill set standpoint, especially in this type of offense that they want to run, I would much rather a player that was a little bit more versatile and has a little bit more catch and run value to his game than somebody like Higgins, who's a great player, but you know what you're getting out of him, which is that jump ball receiver, that big body on the outside, and basically are mostly going to play him at X on the perimeter, and that's where he's going to live. Whereas a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, and this is probably why Brandon Aiyuk's going to get paid more and is going to be more valuable around the league, but a guy like Brandon Aiyuk does just a ton of more things to me than somebody like T. Higgins, both from a route tree's perspective, alignment, and then most of all, what he can do with the football in his hands. That I'm just not sure T. Higgins has that gear as a ball carrier in the open field. So in this offense, not that we should get too bogged down about stylistic fit in an offense we haven't even seen yet, but in this offense, it does feel like Brandon Aiyuk would be a much better fit for what they're trying to do. And it doesn't surprise me either that there were rumors around the draft that they were maybe interested in Debo as well, because I think that he's exactly the type of guy that you would want to put into this kind of offense too. So it's not that I'm a hard no on T. Higgins. I just wonder if there are better stylistic fits for what they're trying to build here.
I guess I would still, you look at the true X position that he plays, and I don't really think the Patriots have anything like that on the roster. So I feel like that addition could make maybe even more sense than Aiyuk. And now granted, you would upgrade with Aiyuk over just about any other Z receiver they have. They can go with Javon Baker, put him at X. Jalen Polk, I guess they can try and work him in at X, but I feel like everything on the other side is sort of just, a mosh pit of your Kendrick Bournes and KJ Osbornes and even Juju Smith-Schuster, where I just think adding that, again, the jump ball, true X receiver skill set can help this, this offense out so much. And now I would still go Aiyuk over him, but you said it perfectly, Evan. You can't just ignore talent. Like, you don't have anything like T. Higgins right now, that caliber of player at all. I'm excited to see what they have in guys like Polk and Javon Baker, but those are still sort of question marks. Those are still those lottery picks that you mentioned, Taylor. Like, T. Higgins is pretty much now. He's been hurt, and I think his best season is like 1,100-yard season a couple years ago. So he's still kind of working off some potential rather than complete product on the field. But I would do it as well, and I would pay him too. You have salary cap space. You have it going forward. You need to spend it on a receiver. So again, I've been team trade for a receiver since early last year, or even before that, and I'm still well on that island.
I'd like him on a value, to be honest. I do think he's got some position versatility because really Jamar Chase has been the X for the Bengals. Obviously, when he's healthy, and T. Higgins has been more of their Z receiver, but he does have that X receiver skill set. And Mike, you made a great point. We haven't seen him be the number one. We can project, and obviously with his skill set, it wouldn't be crazy for him to go to a team where he becomes their alpha and you see him thrive, but it is still a projection. And when you lump in the injuries, I'm just not sure that I'm so comfortable with giving up like a first or even a second round pick. He is super talented, and if it weren't even for the injuries, I would say, you know what, I'll bank on the upside. If you have an elite 2 even, I think that's still valuable, but for what they probably have to give up to get him, I'm not sure that's the route I'd like to see them going. Again, if you're in the range of like top 10, top 15, you can get a bona fide X receiver who can be that, like what they did with Joe Burrow, where they went out and got T. Higgins, and the next year you get Jamar Chase, and that's the real, dominant alpha type receiver. So yeah, I just don't know if I love the value that you probably have to give up to get him. But obviously talented player, just a lot that you're projecting there. We got a lot more questions. This is going to be an offensive line heavy episode, which is going to be exciting for some people, maybe not so much for others. But I know Evan and I are on very different ends of the fence with some of these questions. So that's
I'll be the mediator.
Thank you. But first, quick word from our friends at Game Time. Be right back.
The NBA Finals are finally here, and if I have any chance at all to find tickets to a game, it's probably going to be through Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Getting through the Game Time app is super easy, and I really like their user interface. All you have to do is go to the game or event that you want to attend, go through the venue to see where you want to sit relative to the action. Then you can actually get a panoramic view of your seat so you'll know exactly what to expect once you get your ticket. Game Time is also great for those weekends where you're not really sure what you want to do with your night, because you can just scroll through, look at flash deals, zone deals, or last-minute tickets, and find a plan to spend the rest of your day or evening. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, I'm going to open up the floodgates. Is Mike Onwenu a better fit for the Alex Van Pelt scheme at right guard or right tackle? Now, for context, the Patriots really had Mike Onwenu at right tackle as we expected for most of the spring, but we saw in the last 2 days during minicamp, he started repping at right guard. Now, in the first time we saw it, this was more with the second team. Then in the final day, we actually saw that as the starting lineup with the right side composed of Mike Onwenu at guard and Caden Wallace at right tackle as the team tries to find its best 5 players. Now, personally, I do like that idea of having those 5 guys on the field. I think that's your best bet. Caden Wallace is a 3rd-round pick, but was someone that people thought with good coaching could be a pretty immediate contributor. So, Evan, I'm giving you the floor first. What do you think, guard or tackle?
Well, it's a 3-pronged approach for me here, or point here. So I'll make it quick, though. Number one, I personally believe that Mike Onwenu is a guard. I've thought he's a guard since the day they drafted him. He's a guard body type. He's plays like a guard, built like a guard, walks like a guard, is a guard, right? So I feel like we're getting maybe a little bit outside of the purview here by making him a long-term tackle. And I agree that there are things that he could probably improve technique-wise with a full offseason of training at that position and making himself a little bit more ready in terms of his footwork and all those different types of technique things that he can get into. The biggest thing to me being the footwork and his ability to explode out of his stance and really cut off the corner. But in general, I'm sure he could get better at it. But I feel like Patriots fans, and myself included at times, fall into this trap of saying, oh, Mike Onwenu is this really, really good tackle, when in reality, he's just better than Vidarian Lowe and Connor McDermott and all the other trash that we've seen them roll out there at that spot. So it's like, what, is he really a great right tackle, or is he just better than what they've had at right tackle over the last couple of years? So that's point number one. Point number two to me is that this isn't even about Mike Onwenu. It's more about the 5th spot that they have in the starting lineup. Mike Onwenu is going to start somewhere. We know that. But the question is is Caden Wallace a better right tackle than Nick Leverett or Layden Robinson is a right guard? And if the answer is yes, then I always steer towards the side of get your best 5 out there on the field. They're trying to make Mike Onwenu a right tackler. Pigeonholing him into that spot is now making you worse at right guard and basically making you worse at 2 spots all at the same time, all to just force it because you paid him, in air quotes, like a right tackle. I don't think is the right thing to do. And the last thing, just talking to some of the coaches that were in Cleveland last year that are now here, AVP, Scott Peters, all those guys. They've mentioned a couple times about DeJuan Jones and the range at that right tackle spot in Cleveland last year and how they had to go away from some of the outside zone bootleg type of stuff that they did with the Browns so often over the last 4 years because DeJuan Jones is a mauler and he's not really one of those guys that's got terrific range at the tackle position. So I think that they could probably do it in any way that they wanted to do it. Maybe we're getting a little too bogged down in the outside zone of it all. And it's probably more nuanced than that. But just in general, I feel like the bigger point is getting your best 5 on the field and making sure that every single spot is as good as it could possibly be.
I mean, honestly, I'm not going to get too much into scheme because that's our next question. But for the most part, I 100% agree. Like I've said that I think Mike Onwenu is a potential Pro Bowl guard, and he's like a solid tackle. I under no impression that he is going to be like a baller at right tackle just because he has an offseason. I think he could be better, but I definitely don't think it's the best use of his skill set. And I also agree that Nick Leverett, I think he's a solid player. He has started games in this league, probably not where his career is going to be. I think he is really more of a backup spot starter. But if they were saying, hey, Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson are ready, that's where I'm like, okay, I understand if you want to have him there and then see which one of your rookies develops. But, I mean, if you're looking at your best 5, like I said, I think Caden Wallace is someone, especially under Scott Peters, where he's really the magic sauce here. We're talking about an offensive line group last season that just had so little continuity, both when it came to just health along the offensive line and also with coaching, obviously, with Adrian Clem teaching something that didn't mesh with what Bill O'Brien and the rest of the staff were trying to coach. And then you end up losing him and have multiple voices trying to figure out the offensive line. I think Scott Peters is someone who's worked with Alex Van Pelt, understands what he wants. And the players have obviously raved about how hands-on he is and the way he coaches, where he leaves very little up in the air because he wants players to understand and make sure that if they don't understand something, it's something where he can fill the gap. So really, when it comes to pure function and logic, I totally agree. I do think that Mike Onwenu is a better fit at guard in the system. But that also brings us to the scheme part, which we can dive a bit into. But Mike, was there anything else that you want to add?
I'll just agree that I'll agree with basically everything, but also the Caden Wallace factor to me. Like when they originally picked him, confusion. We need more right tackles. We don't have a left tackle. What the hell are we doing? Then it's like, oh, they would like him to play left tackle. Okay, we'll see what happens. Why isn't he playing left tackle? This is BS. Like you drafted him to be your left tackle. Why are you playing him at right? And now I'm kind of back to the mindset like, okay, well, if he can play right on who's better at guard, you have Chooks for a year on the left side, and then you can figure that out next year with that top 5, top 10 pick we just talked about and kind of move things forward from there. But just don't continue the constant shuffle you had last year. I talk about it all the time on this show. They started, I think, 10 or 11 different offensive line combinations over 17 games last year. That can't happen again this year. That's how you get your quarterback killed. The consistency has been what made this Patriots offensive line under Scar so good. So if you have your top 5 that you feel comfortable with, that you can play for most games, barring injury, then do that. I don't really care where they play. And I also agree too with the money, Evan. Like, sure, you would like to see, I guess, them get more for their money and play them at right tackle, but at the same time, if it's going to hinder the rest of your offensive line, it doesn't matter. Plus, we saw all the guard money that guys got this year anyway. The guy in LA, I can't think of his name, was it Dotson or something, got a ton of money. Somebody else. So like that. It's fine if he's making that kind of money at right guard, as long as the rest of the trickle down effect works, then I'm good with it.
Yeah, I feel like the money thing, just quickly, how many great interior pass rushers there are in the league nowadays, and we're really in this almost golden era, I feel like, of interior guys, and maybe Aaron Donald retiring takes that back just a step, but in general, every single week you're going to see a really good interior pass rusher or two on the inside. Patriots have one of their own. They just paid him $90 million to go rush quarterbacks, right? So these guys are up the wazoo everywhere. And is it really a bad thing to have a high-level guard? And maybe City So takes that next step this year as well. That's a pretty good rock solid interior trio that the Patriots have for their young quarterback. And I just love the idea, Mike, you alluded to it, of let's get 4/5 of the offensive line straightened out by the end of this season. All those guys are going to be here and under contract in 2025. And then you draft a Kelvin Banks Jr., you draft a Will Campbell, you draft one of these top left tackles in the draft next year. And now all of a sudden, all you're doing is putting that left tackle in, dropping him in, and the other 4/5 of the line have been playing together in those spots for an entire year. And maybe you hit the ground running in 2025. So I wouldn't get too caught up in the money of it all either, because of how much those interior guys are starting to get paid on both sides of the ball.
100%. That's what I was actually going to ask you, because I think right now by average, Onwenu is the third highest paid guard, which for a guy who in pass protection, you really don't need to worry about. And if you use him to his strengths, there's not a lot of downhill run blockers that are better than Mike Onwenu. So I think you can absolutely justify a guy who, one, gives you those things, but also has the flexibility to play tackle, which the other two guys who are paid more than him, I don't really think you can say the same about. Also very underrated. This combination that we're talking about has everyone but Chuks Okorafor at their natural positions. City So was a left guard in college. Mike Onwenu obviously has played some of his best football at right guard. And then Caden Wallace gets to continue at right tackle. We also know he's going to cross-train behind the scenes like he did in college. So left tackle probably won't be as new for him whenever or if he ends up getting asked to play that position. But between him and Chuks Okorafor is a much more natural fit at the left tackle spot. So you can understand what the thinking is and just keeping Caden on the right side. Although, because I've seen some questions about why Chuks isn't the guy on the right if Caden Wallace is your future at left tackle. Now, moving on, do you see Alex Van Pelt utilizing more gap runs instead of outside zone if and when he plays guard? This is the part where, the fit kind of worries me, but I'm cool with it if they end up playing to his strengths. But what do you think, Evan?
Well, I think it's not just him. In general, I look at this offensive line on paper and think it's a better fit for them to be running downhill at defenses. And I love the idea of the play actions and the bootlegs and the moving pockets. Like, we all love the idea of that, but you can still do some of those things off of the pullers and things like that they did in Cleveland. You run a trap, you run a toss play, you run something like that, and you can still get that misdirection and flow going with the bootleg. So I don't think it's just an outside zone scheme. I think it's also worth mentioning that a lot of these quote unquote outside zone teams, the 49ers, the Rams, they've kind of moved away from those things over the last couple of years as defenses have caught up to that scheme. So in general, I don't think it's just a Mike Onwenu thing. I would like to see them still be pretty gap heavy just because it fits the entire line. And if teams are going to expect them to be outside zone heavy and that's how they're going to game plan them, you're going to have opportunities to run downhill at teams of the middle of the field. So I don't necessarily know. I guess I go back to something I said earlier. Maybe we are making a little bit too much out of this whole outside zone system, and this is going to be what they're going to do, and that sort of thing. They're definitely going to want to move the pocket, but you, like I said, you can incorporate moving pockets in different ways, and it doesn't just have to be married to the outside zone.
And I'll add too quickly, just like Alex Van Pelt said it himself to us. I forget whether it was before camp, before even the draft maybe, but we're going to call our offense around our players. We're not going to try and pigeonhole them into an offense. So like if they think Mike Onwenu is a better guard, even though they have to move away from their quote unquote bread and butter, that outside zone scheme, they're going to switch it up. They're going to run, downhill gap stuff like you said, and they're going to make it work, because why are you going to try and pigeonhole these guys into something that doesn't work just because that's the offense you like to run and you think can work? And then it's just kind of a disaster from there. So like, I'm with you. We probably shouldn't get too bogged down into it, because at the end of the day, players make plays, and you have to make those guys work, and you have to make the offense work for them.
I agree with both of you. My only concern is I went all the way back in Alex Van Pelt's history as a coordinator, even as a quarterbacks coach when he was in Green Bay. Outside zone has been number 1 or number 2 in terms of the most called runs for all of those teams. Even when DeJuan Jones took over at the tackle spot for them, they still had outside zone and pin pull as their 2 most called run concepts. So it seems like still fundamentally, and we know Alex Van Pelt is on record, that wide zone scheme, I think maybe we're putting too much into it because maybe we're hesitant to the idea that he'll move away from it. But he's even said that wide zone is a fundamental aspect of his offense because of the ability to move the pocket. Now, that being said, Evan, you're 100% right. Like, I went back and watched the Browns offense. There's a ton of those pulling guards where you see them use bootleg off that and move the pocket. You can still use sprint outs where it's not necessarily that outside zone boot scheme 100%. But it still limits what you can do in the run game. And those Browns offenses, we talked about it in other shows, Evan, there's a lot of versatility. They run everything, and they run everything very well. And one of the reasons I think Mike Onwenu wasn't as highly sought after in free agency is because all these teams in the NFL that are really successful are still running outside zone. The Rams are running a ton of duo. The 49ers running a ton of power and counter. But they're still using outside zone as a staple concept. So that's what worries me. And somebody in my comments yesterday was just like, oh, what you're saying, like, and when he was just shit when he's moving. And I don't think he's like a bad player, but if you watch the tape, it's very obvious that outside zone is not something where he thrives because one, you have to get out in front of guys very often. And at guard, I think that's asked of you more often than if you're at tackle where, you can really just wall guys off and hit between the tackles, not necessarily always getting out in front. So that's really just what worries me. I don't love the idea of the ground game kind of being confined to not being able to run outside zone. But at the same time, Onwenu, like I said, is one of the best down blocking offensive linemen in the NFL. So if you still have to go behind that and use that as your staple, I don't think there's anything wrong with it as long as the play calling is complementary and it doesn't get to like a Bill O'Brien situation. Like Evan, we talked about it all the time where Bill O'Brien's a great coach, but he's not a great coach when it comes to calling the run game. And there was so much repetitiveness, in part because of the personnel, that it just felt like we knew what was coming all the time. It's either duo, maybe they'll mix in a polar, but we kind of always have some idea, and it felt like that made things harder. But we will see. I trust the staff to play to their guys' strengths, but I just don't love the idea of the limits it puts on them. But again, we will see. Now, continuing with the offensive line, this has been a conversation I've heard a lot. And we've also talked about this at practices over, there's some trepidation over whether Drake Maye should play if they don't find a stable offensive line grouping. So how much could instability along the offensive line affect which quarterback ultimately starts the majority of the games?
So this is something that Alex and I have argued about on Catch 22 to the point where people are annoyed at us arguing about it so much. He is definitely on the side of things that he wants to see the offensive line for maybe a month or two and make sure that it's all going to be perfect for the baby Drake Maye, right? And we just got to hold his hand all the way through. My whole thing is that when you look at a lot of stats that are based off of offensive line, sacks, like pressures, things like that. So much of that is controlled by the quarterback and controlled by the scheme and what they're asking the quarterback to do. But mainly it's controlled by the quarterback. And a lot of the teams that have guys that are pressured at a super high rate or sacked at a super high rate have mobile quarterbacks or guys that like to hold the ball, or there's some sort of context that's involved in all of that. This is a long way of saying if Drake Maye is as good as I think he could possibly be, then I think he'll protect himself. Like he'll be able to figure out how to work around it. He played it behind a terrible offensive line at North Carolina last year. And I know it's college to the pros, but the ideas are still the same. I also just feel a lot more comfortable with the fact that he's 225 pounds and mobile. Like we're not asking him to just sit there like, on a spot like Mac Jones, where he's not really going to be able to move off and he's not really going to be able to get outside the pocket. So I'm not as concerned about the offensive line with Drake Maye as I would be with a true pocket passer like a Mac Jones or a Bailey Zappi or someone along those lines. But I can understand that you don't want to. Week one, you really have a lot of uncertainty over the summer. You have no idea how it's really going to look. And then you put the rookie behind that type of offensive line. I get why people have reservations about that, but I just wouldn't let it linger for too long. If he's ready to play, I'm not waiting until 2025 to play him just because the offensive line is not where we all want it to be. It's just kind of silly, in my opinion.
I've waffled on this a lot too, because on one hand, I wrote about this a little bit on Sunday, patience is a virtue here because, and it's so you have patience with him. You don't need to do anything because like I said earlier, you don't have to win this year. So you don't have to rush him in and you can take this slow and you can take it slow and you don't have to be like, well, he's ready because he made 3 or 4 passes this past practice and he looks better than Jacoby today. Let's do it. I think they're going to take this slow just because of how they've sort of set up this entire offseason, which, they obviously they trade Mac, they bring in Van Pelt, who, can in some ways be considered a good quarterback guru. They bring in Jacoby Brissett, who still has playing football left in him to be kind of that guy and hold it down as a bridge for a little while. So I just think that you don't have to just rush it in. Now, on the flip side of that, since you don't have to worry about winning games this year, throw him into the fire and see what happens, because it doesn't matter if he loses. I mean, I guess in theory it does, because if he plays bad football and his confidence gets shot, etc., that can kind of change things. But you don't want him to get killed. So I think you want to see a little bit of stability along the offensive line. But at the same time, you're right, Evan, like the quarterback can protect himself, especially the way he can move, and, you can switch protections, things like that, kind of make it work from there. So like, that's a long way of saying that I think they need to figure something out, but it doesn't have to be completely perfect for him to be thrown into the fire.
Yeah, I think this offensive line group, if it ends up being the combination that we've seen, I feel like has more reason for optimism than people really talk about. Like, I understand last season was traumatizing for a lot of people, but we also need to consider the fact that they had so many players who just were not career starters in the NFL. Now, Chuks Okorafor, no, he's never been a top 10, top 15 left tackle, period, but he's someone who has been a starter for multiple seasons, was only benched because he got caught mouthing off about an offensive coordinator who wound up getting fired like 2 weeks later. He's someone that they re-signed. When you look at his pass or his pressure rate allowed last season, he was actually top 10 among offensive tackles. And now I'm not saying that he's going to be a Pro Bowl or anything, but this is a guy who's proven he can start in the NFL. Obviously a projection now that he's on the left side. But, I think it's a worst case scenario to think that he's just going to become a turnstile. Then Sidy Sow is someone that I think we can expect to take a leap after he was solid last season. David Andrews is David Andrews. Mike Onwenu, like we said, one of the better guards, especially pass blocking guards in the NFL. And then Caden Wallace, obviously a rookie, but someone who's played a lot of football as well, and you'd expect to kind of get acclimated a little faster because of his experience, his maturity, and having Scott Peters. Now, on top of that, it's not all the offensive line. Like, I'm not sure if it was Scar specifically, but I know some offensive line coaches basically said that if a sack is given up, it should never really be the offensive lineman's responsibility. Now, there's exceptions, obviously, where like quick pressures, like we saw sometimes with Vidarian Lowe throughout last season, those are things that you can't have. And I don't really think there's anybody on the line where you expect that to be the case. But a lot of that is play calling, where if you look at how the Browns call their offense, if Alex Van Pelt takes, a page out of their book, very rarely are you seeing a five-man protection where the quarterback's just dropping back, holding onto the ball. There's a lot of play actions. There's RPO sprinkled in. It's obviously a heavy run team. Also quick game. Like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunities if the team stays on schedule for Drake Maye to just be sitting back there where he can get hit. And I think the Browns also did a good job, especially once the tackle situation got worse, of giving help. Where, all right, it is going to be a longer drop back. Each of the tackles, or at least one, is going to get some chip help, so our guy isn't just totally on his own out there. And then, like you guys have also mentioned, it's on the quarterback. And we saw how Drake Maye handled pressure. There's the whole thing where, like, sometimes he'll kind of slide to one side. I do think he could rein that in a little bit, because sometimes he would drift so far he was legitimately standing behind or outside of the tackle. You don't want that. But a lot of the time he had that instinct because he was trying to mitigate pressure coming from another side of the offense, especially if they were blitzing and he knew where it was coming from. And I don't think the Patriots are going to put Drake Maye in if they think that his mechanics are so inconsistent still that going in and facing pressure is going to cause him to decline. I think that's the main thing they want to avoid, is to make sure he doesn't develop bad habits. So if he's in there at all, I think it's a sign from the coaching staff that this guy is showing repeatedly good footwork, in joint practices and in preseason games where he's facing an actual pass rush. And then I think then it's all right. Is the play calling on point? Is the offensive line just not terrible? And I do think there's reason to expect that it's at least going to be solid, if not, otherworldly necessarily.
I'm glad, Taylor, quickly, I'm glad you mentioned the footwork too, because I think that's going to be more of what they're focused on as far as when they want to start him, rather than if the offensive line is good enough or not. Like, I think that needs to be number one. I don't think if the offensive line is perfect, but he still can't, figure out the way they want him to use his feet, and like you said, the mechanics in the pocket, then they're not going to throw him in there. Where, I think, long story short, that has to be, the focus number one over the offensive line.
Yeah, that's just where I'm coming from too, I guess, is just with the patience thing, Mike. No one is advocating for them to throw Drake Maye out there week one before he's ready. Like, there's not a single person that wants them to do that. But if he's ready behind the scenes and you're just sitting him entire season and wasting an entire season of football just because you're worried that the offensive line is not good enough to protect him, you're doing a lot of other people a disservice that aren't just Drake Maye. And that's something that I feel like people don't put enough stock in. You go down to Matthew Judon's locker and you tell him why the best quarterback isn't playing when he's 33 years old in the league, or David Andrews, or any of these guys that are in this locker room that are a little bit older, or veteran guys, or whatever the case may be. And we're saying we're going to waste an entire year of your career because Drake Maye needs to sit the entire season because our left tackle isn't where we want it to be yet. That's just, I feel like you'd risk significantly losing a lot of people in that locker room if that's the case. And you also risk this Gerard Mayo, Elliott Wolf era getting off to an awful start, a really, really bad start. And if this team is 2-15 or something like that in year one with Gerard Mayo, it's going to be tough to sell that to the fan base. And then next year you have Drake Maye start week one and he's, awesome. Everyone's going to be like, what the heck, guys? We wasted an entire season. So there's a lot of elements to this in the locker room too, that playing the best guy holds so much weight for a lot of those other guys. You tell the other 52 guys on the roster that, he shouldn't be playing when he's out there and is the best quarterback on the field all summer long. That's going to be difficult to do.
Yeah, the locker room element, I think, is a perfect way to sum it up, because it's one thing when Bill Belichick's in charge and he can do whatever he wants and there's not going to be a whole lot of pushback. And if there is, no one's going to say it to his face. With Gerard Mayo, he's been in the locker room. It's going to be very hard, I'm sure, for him as a defender to look and see Maye if he ends up torching the defense on a regular basis and justify not playing him. It just doesn't make sense. And obviously, we understand that Drake Maye, like Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo have said, our futures are likely tied to how well Drake Maye performs. But I think that's a great point, that there's other players who you already kind of wasted a year of their careers because of the horrible quarterback situation and offensive situation last season. It's going to be really hard to look those guys, especially the veterans like David Andrews or whomever, in the face and be like, yeah, we just wanted to play it safe. These guys want to win football games. We may on the outside think, oh, this year doesn't matter. No one in the locker room is thinking that way. That's a very important thing to remember. All right, we got a few more questions coming up, but first, quick word from our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back.
Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. The finals mean more on Prize Picks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else. When the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball was just getting started, with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breonna Taylor and Asia Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the basketball board, and I'm taking Jaylen Brown's overs on points and rebounds because dude has been absolutely killing it. I'm also going to take Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-pointers made and Breonna Stewart for more than 25 points. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
No, but I'm really throwing this one to you because I know this is a topic that you've been pretty interested in throughout the offseason. So from Los, friend of the show, thank you, buddy. With David Andrews having to make changes at the line of scrimmage in the new scheme, do you anticipate Drake Maye acclimating quicker once he starts? Did similar duties falling on Mac Jones ultimately hurt him?
It's a good question. I feel like it's something that we've talked about a little bit with O'Brien. I remember talking about it a little bit with Josh McDaniels when he was here as well, just how much mentally was on the quarterback pre-snap in the old offense. And all these guys, I feel like now, for the most part, are going away from that. When I say all these guys, I mean like the Shanahan tree guys, Shanahan, McVay, all those guys, LaFleur in Green Bay. There isn't a whole lot of quarterback centric manipulation at the line, right? Like you're not really calling out Mike points. You're not checking into different protections and things like that. Most of the plays that they have called in the huddle have predetermined hots and predetermined answers to if you see pressure, if you see that, you see this, you get the ball out of your hand. Now, in some ways that gets them into trouble. Like, there's two sides to every story. In the Super Bowl, they got Brock Purdy into a lot of trouble because he's locked into this play, and the Chiefs knew what was happening. And obviously Spagnuolo is a freaking maniac, and he just was able to get the upper hand in those situations. So it can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it does hurt you if the defense is really good at predicting at what you're going to do and is a step ahead and all that kind of stuff, and you don't have those answers. But in general, I like this system a little bit better because I just think there's so much. Van Pelt put it to me once in one of these conversations we've had with him that the quarterback already has enough to do. There's enough on a quarterback's plate when it comes to pre and post snap diagnosis of defenses and things like that. That to add a whole nother layer of protections onto his plate as well can often be too much to overcome, especially for a young QB. So I'm glad they're headed in this direction. You have a veteran center who's been 10, 11 years in the league. I'd much rather put that on him than worry Drake Maye with all that type of stuff. So in the long run, I think it's going to be good. But there's good things and bad things about anything that you do.
And how do you think it affected Mac?
That's a good question. I don't feel like it affected Mac because I feel like if Mac was going to be great, that was how he was going to be great. Was that field general? He was going to be that maestro. And I almost feel like he said all the time that he felt more at ease when he had the controls and he was the one steering things and things like that. But maybe at the end of the day, it ended up consuming him and it was too much. But I think that Mac Jones's failures, along with things outside of his purview, like coaching and things like that, I think a lot of Mac Jones's failures were just that Mac Jones wasn't good enough to be the franchise guy. But in general, I feel like that suited Mac, whereas I'm not sure it necessarily would in the case of a guy like Drake Maye.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I'm totally with you on the Mac stuff. I don't think that that's the only thing that hurt him by any means. Now, could it have added to it? Sure. But there was a million other things that happened. 4 offensive coordinators in 4 years, or three in 3 years, whatever it was. I can't even keep track at this point. But so much constant turnover, and having that on his plate throughout the turnover, I guess, does, make it worse too. But yeah, I think I say most of it was out of his control. I'm on the Damian Harris train on that. I don't know if you guys saw his quotes from a couple weeks ago, but as far as Andrews calling at the line of scrimmage, I think it's perfect for a young quarterback. I wonder, and now, like you said, he is a 10 and 11 year veteran, but he hasn't really done much of this himself either. So he's kind of getting thrown on him late in his career. And so that's a pretty monumental change for him. Now in his 30s, but it's also better on a 30-year-old who's seen it than a 22-year-old who is just coming off a season where, again, he was like I said, 22 years old in college, bad offensive line, things like that. So it does help him acclimate quickly. And I think that eventually you can give him some leeway there to kind of do some stuff on his own at the line of scrimmage too, which I think comes naturally with, a lot of these guys. So, yeah, that's kind of my thought. I think it does help him, and I think Andrews will be ready for it, but it's something to kind of watch out for because he hasn't done much of it in his career.
Yeah, when it comes to those changes at the offensive line, I always think about Pat Mahomes when he was on the Kelsey show, and he talked about how every time he played the Patriots, they would show him fronts, and he had no idea how to change the protection to work it out. So he was just like sort, basically just figure it out. I don't know what you want me to do. And how he had to play them multiple times before, and then actually work with their offensive line coach before he really understood how to call protection. So even with somebody like Mahomes, who did get to get to sit pretty much his entire freshman rookie year, oh my goodness, didn't really get thrown into the fire. It was even hard for him to really figure those things out. So I do agree with the idea that it makes more sense to take that off a quarterback's plate, because not everyone is Tom Brady. Now, like you mentioned in the Super Bowl, when it comes to those can calls where most teams will come to the line of scrimmage, have 2 plays called based on what look they get from the defense, they'll call can or whatever and switch the plays. But a good defensive coordinator, unless that offensive coordinator is very tuned into their own tendencies and understands what people might be looking for, you can usually predict what's going to happen based on the formation, the situation, what that can call is going to look like. And not everyone's Brady, where you've seen everything and the offense inside and out, and you can basically just manipulate it and make it whatever you want. So I agree. I think that's a much better idea to try to put as little on Drake Maye's plate from a mental perspective as possible when it comes to that. And then with Mac, I think it's the same thing. I think that he was smart enough to handle what they wanted him to do. He did it in 2021 when he was operating Josh McDaniels' offense. Like, I don't think it was about Mac Jones not being able to handle everything at the line of scrimmage, but it definitely seemed towards the end like he was making calls and changing things at the line of scrimmage. Then the story comes out that he's making all these adjustments and then not throwing to where the ball's supposed to go. So, yeah, I really don't think that had anything to do with Mac. I think that was more combination of the, what was happening around him and also the fact that maybe he just wasn't the guy. All right. Why are people not talking about Marcus Jones? He feels like forgotten man when people discuss our young talent. This is an interesting one, and I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I don't feel like people are forgetting Marcus Jones. There's just a lot of guys to talk about that are newer to the team than Marcus Jones is, and maybe he's getting lost in the Drake Maye, Jalen Polk shuffle of it all. But the biggest thing for Marcus Jones to me, and we disagree with about this all the time with me and Paul Perillo. I think a lot of people feel like Marcus Jones is probably too small and not going to be durable enough to truly be a full-time corner, even in the slot, where this is where I think he could probably carve out a full-time role. I'm not necessarily there yet, but maybe his future is like a sixth defensive back in like a dime where he's playing a little slot, maybe a little bit of safety in certain situations, and being more of that Miles Bryant type player than like a true, this guy's going to be out there and we're going to be confident in him being out there. But between that, if that's his floor, is him being able to be like a nickel or a dime back, and then he's also going to be an all-pro return man, he's going to have a long career, right? Like those two things are going to make it so that he has a long career. I'm just not sure where he fits in, where we're like, all right, this guy's going to be a really, really good defensive player. That's going to be Jonathan Jones. Like he's going to just be out there all the time and be a high-end player.
I think the one of the things you said, Evan, is obviously the fact that it's an offensive league. The Patriots just drafted their quarterback with the number 3 overall pick and 2 wide receivers in the second and fourth rounds. The other thing is he was hurt last year, so like it's kind of we're 2 years or a year and change away from him being on the offense, and that that throw against Buffalo where they threw him a screen pass for a touchdown, set him up like a kick return. We haven't really seen any of that for a long time. And so in the midst of the coaching turnover and guys on offense, and Christian Gonzalez, I guess he was hurt too, but he's sort of the budding star on defense. So there hasn't been much attention on that side of the ball anyway. And Taylor, I know I'll leave this to you to get to it, but I know you're not frankly too gung-ho on him as a defender necessarily. And I don't know where I am on him as a guy that they're going to put into an offense as a gadget player, because you don't want to have to rely on gadget players if you don't have to. You want this to be these receivers you bring in and everything to be the guys you want to play on offense, so you don't have to throw a cornerback the football every fourth play to try and get a spark. So that's where I'm at with Marcus Jones. I still have confidence in him on defense. We'll see how these other guys on the outside and Alex Austin and Isaiah Bolden and things like that can kind of shift the whole scene in the back end. But I think it just has to do with the fact that he was hurt and, more focuses on the offense.
Yeah, I think that Marcus Jones is a fine defender. It's just he hasn't been healthy consistently. Yeah. That's really what it comes down to. In my head, he's someone where if he's available, awesome, super cool. You have more flexibility. If not, it's kind of what you've grown to expect at this point in his career. And Evan, I agree, especially in that slot role where you take on so much responsibility against the run. I think he can do it, but it's just the wear and tear. I don't know if he can handle that. Now, I would like it. We've seen Isaiah Bolden, who Mayo did say is more of a perimeter guy, but he's been getting a lot of snaps in the slot. I wouldn't mind if he was kind of like their Miles Bryant, where on early downs where you're mostly playing zone, you kind of have a bigger presence there. He's super versatile. Maybe you rotate where, all right, Marcus Jones is on the field because we want to play man coverage. That, I'm cool with that. I think he said he doesn't want to be a gadget player anymore, so he's probably just going to be on defense and special teams where, again, if he can stay healthy and be a role player, that's fantastic. But I think you don't really hear people talk about him because he hasn't given us a ton to talk about. I thought he was really impressive, honestly, as a rookie. He had that one game against the Raiders where he's looking good against Devontae Adams. But at the same time, you also have the Bengals game where he literally could not do anything because of the height disadvantage. And we barely even seen him in the slot, to be honest. Even last year when we were in training camp, he was mostly an outside guy. So it's just there's so many unknowns with him. He's an exciting prospect, but I just think when you're looking at what he's actually giving you on the field, there's just not a whole lot to talk about. But again, if he can be that kind of dime player where we know the pass is coming, let him use his fluidity, his athleticism to cover guys mano a mano, I'm all good with that. All right, now we're going to wrap it up with another defensive question. Let's say this year's defense pops off and 2 to 3 defensive players leap from yellow, orange, green tiers of your roster charting all the way down to blue or all pro. So no Gonzo or Barmore. Who is it? Just for clarification, for my kind of roster breakdowns, orange basically means that you're either an okay starter or a really high-end role player like an Anthony Jennings. Elite run defender, doesn't give you much in terms of pass rush or coverage. Yellow means you're a backup or a special teamer where you don't really want this person on the field. It's like in a rotation, sure, but you're not scheming opportunities for them. And green means that they are a quality starter. So like a Jonathan Jones where he's not going to make a Pro Bowl, but he's someone that you want to be on the field because he's a positive contributor. Then blue is pretty much Pro Bowler, and then purple is all pro. So, Evan, who do you think could potentially break out this season?
Breakout. I don't like saying this, and I don't mean to make that as a slight, but I just haven't really been on the Keion White hype train since they drafted him. But he's the one guy on the defense I feel like is the honest answer if I'm being objective about it, because those other guys, to your point of your chart, Taylor, they're all kind of solid starters or they're already here. Like, we're not going to sit here and say that Christian Barmore is going to break out. He already did break out. So other than Gonzalez, if you want to count him as someone that it's just a month of production so far, so it hasn't truly broken out yet necessarily, then I guess you could put him in this category too. But the one thing that intrigues me about Keion White that we saw a little bit in the spring is how much they're planning, or I think they're hoping to plan on moving him around the front, where he's going to be more of like a hunting of matchup type of guy, and maybe find a home for him to be a full-time player. That's my biggest concern with Keion White, is that he's too much of a tweener. Is he a stand-up edge defender? Is he a hand in the dirt end? Is he an interior rusher? Is he an exterior, outside rusher? Like, where is his permanent, this is Keion White's position? Because I think so many times in this league, if you get caught up in, he's a jack of all trades and we're just going to move him all around, that's how you get Adelius Thomas, right? That's how you get guys that just actually are just not, they're masters of none, right? Like, it's the other side of that. And that's what I'm worried about with Keion White. But if I had to pick based off of talent, based off of projected role, who's the guy that's most likely to break out in those categories, it would probably be Keion.
I will go with 2 safeties in Kyle Duggar, who I guess has kind of already broken out, but I still think he can have that ceiling if he improves in coverage. And then Marte Mapu. I think that's another one of those 3 guys from the last, that last draft. We talk about Gonzo, talk about Keion White. Mapu was, kind of, I don't want to call it a disappointment last year, but he's kind of in that, I guess he is kind of a tweener too, where is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? Where do you want to play him? But I think they can get something out of him, hopefully, as he continues to grow in the NFL and break out, because he's a guy who, I mean, Taylor, you talked about on the stream last year. You loved him. It was Daniel Jeremiah's guy. And I think that and I did too, had a lot of confidence in him, and he had a great camp, and I sort of changed course quickly, but it didn't translate to the regular season like we would have wanted it to. So see what happens there, but I think he could potentially get there.
Maybe they shouldn't play him 30 yards off the ball. No,
exactly.
Sorry.
I do like the dime linebacker rule. Not an actual linebacker, but dime linebacker. I'm all here for it. I'm going to go with Joshua Uche. And the reason is, I think, really realistically, I think he's an orange tier player for me, where I think he can be a high-end role player. Obviously, he's a pass rusher. But if, he said himself, he expects to be a better fit in DeMarcus Covington's scheme, where, I asked him, hey, why, what happened with the production dip after he did break out in 2022 and obviously went the other way in 2023? He pretty much politely said that the scheme wasn't really helping him out much. He said, I'm doing my job, which, when you look at the tape, he's containing a lot. He's not really pinning his ears back in the role that suits him best. But again, I think he's a role player. I don't think he's ever going to be an every down player. But if he can somehow manage to get you like almost 20-ish sacks, that's hard because he's only a role player. But if he explodes and becomes that highly efficient kind of Bryce Huff type role player, where every time he's on the field, he's usually getting some kind of pressure, I think he could poke his head into that Pro Bowl nod where, the public isn't really going to care that he doesn't play every down. If you're getting a lot of sacks in the modern NFL, you're going to start getting national attention like we saw him start to get in 2022. So kind of a cheat answer because, again, I do think he's more of a high-end role player as his ceiling. But if he's a guy who just getting sacks every single game and is someone where you're hearing other teams talk about him in press conferences, that's where I feel like he may be able to get kind of buzz where he kind of starts poking into that kind of category. All right, guys. This has been very fun. Evan, thank you so much for your time, buddy. I know you're super busy. Before we let you go, please let the people know where they can find you if they don't know already, and what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, on Patriots.com, we're not going anywhere during the summer break. So we'll still have our normal shows, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Patriots Unfiltered, and then Thursdays with the Barth. I got to mention him. We'll do Catch 22 on Thursdays as well. So even though the Patriots are off for until training camp, we'll still have the shows and we'll still be rolling. We'll probably get into some off-season stuff. We always get a little goofy this time of year, so it's not always all football and Patriots Unfiltered, but it's always funny doing Unfiltered and then doing Catch 22 because Catch 22 is football 12 months out of the year, and then Unfiltered we're talking about movies or crazy nonsense. So it's funny. You get to do some different things.
Awesome. Mike, what you got?
Oh boy. New Sunday columns coming every week. Behind the Mic podcast this week. We're coming back to it. Took a couple weeks off to round out the Patriots, but we will have a special guest on there as well on Wednesday. So check it out. Follow me on Twitter at Mike Kadlick for all Patriots. And we have the Celtics tonight too. Let's not forget that. Tune in. Celtics, CLNS. We'll have a ton of stuff. Evan, who do you like tonight? Do you think the Celtics end it?
I do think the Celtics ended tonight. I feel like the Mavericks really did not want to get swept. It definitely made me feel better that the Oilers also blew out the Panthers in the Stanley Cup final, where I'm like, all right, now this is a thing of the Game 4 on the road. You don't want to get swept. The home team puts out one good performance. So I'm optimistic that they finish it off tonight. I wish I was going. I'm not, unfortunately. I've been trying all day to get a cheaper ticket. Or free
not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen, guys.
Keep checking game time. Keep checking game time for the last minute. Time's not over. All right. And then, Mike and I are going to have you locked on with some Patriots Daily episodes pretty much every day this week. I've also got roster way too early roster projection coming out. I know Evan dropped his this morning. I've been afraid to read it because I do not want to be influenced. So I kind of skimmed yours real quick. I don't know the details yet, but once mine's out, I'm going to make sure to read it, buddy, because I know you always do a great job with that.
Thank you.
So thank you again, buddy, for joining. Always a blast. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.